The next case I'll be discussing is management of a child with hydrocephalus. This usually comes as a short case. So I'll not be discussing the anatomical and the physiological changes in a pediatric case. So all the PGs are requested to read them from the book nicely. I'll be just highlighting the practical points regarding the anesthetic management. So we have a clinical scenario where the parents present their 2-month-old child with chief complaints of recurrent vomiting for last 2 days and increase in head size since birth. The parents give history that the child was born at 37 weeks of gestation by normal vaginal delivery, and since then there has been progressive enlargement of the size of the head. The child is irritable, lethargic, and feeds poorly, and is unable to hold head. So in the antenatal history, we have to ask the mother whether she had any history of infections during antenatal period. Did she go for regular antenatal checkups? The history of folic acid intake. Regarding the milestones, see, in a pediatric case, you should know all the milestones and the anthropometric measurements. So for this 2-month-old child, the only milestone which he can achieve is the ability to hold head at 3 months. So the child has not attained the relevant milestones yet. The family history, the child had no history of sibling being affected with the same disease or any other family member being affected from the same disease. You should ask about the immunization history and about the treatment history for this complaint or for any other comorbidity or other congenital illness. So in the examination, see the GCS of the patient. Patient was conscious but somnolent, was vomiting, appeared dehydrated, was very lethargic, and measure the vitals. Usually these children have tachycardia with blood pressure slightly on a lower side. Not for the JS, but I would recommend that the PDCC, they should know what is the pediatric GCS score. You might be asked in the pediatric case. So read from the book, the pediatric GCS. On examination, the head circumference was increased. It measured 48 centimeter. So at the age of 2 months, the normal head circumference is around 38 centimeters. So you should know the anthropometric measurements, especially weight, length, head circumference, and the chest circumference. So this child had increase in the head circumference. The overlying skin was shiny with dilated veins. The sunset sign was positive. What is it? It's the upward gaze fallacy, where the sclera is visible on the above the pupil. The upper sclera is visible. There is bossing of forehead. The anterior fontanelle, which normally closes around 9 to 18 months, is open, wide, and bulging. Then the posterior fontanelle, which normally closes around 2 to 3 months, is also full. It's not yet closed. So on pupils examination, they were sluggishly reacting to light, and there was papilledema on examination. Very important in these children, we should also examine the other systems, because the presence of congenital anomalies is very common in these patients. Go for respiratory, cardiovascular, renal, and GI complete examination. Remember the acronym VACTRIL. VACTRIL stands for vertebral, anal atresia, cardiac defects, tracheoesophageal fistula, renal, and radial anomalies. Rule out all these congenital anomalies. Take note. Also, we have to examine the spine in these children. There can be a swelling in the lower lumbar region, which can be a meningomyelocele, or a swelling in the cranial region, which is known as the encephalocele. These neural tube defects are very commonly associated with the hydrocephalus. Meningomyelocele is almost 70% of the children with meningomyelocele have hydrocephalus. So you should take note of these congenital anomalies also. For confirmation of the diagnosis, we go for the CT head. So on the CT scan, the size of the ventricle will be visible. The cause can be make out whether it's due to a tumor or an aqueductal stenosis or an Arnold-Chiari malformation. And also from the CT, we can see the site of obstruction if it is an obstructive hydrocephalus. So what are the main features of hydrocephalus which we can see on the CT scan? There will be loss of differentiation between this white and there will be loss of gray and white differentiation. The sulci will be effaced, and very important, we can see that the ventricles are dilated. There is ballooning of the temporal horns of the frontal horns of the lateral ventricles. These are the frontal horns of the lateral ventricles. These are balloon, known as the Mickey Mouse sign. So this is an indicator of presence of hydrocephalus. Also, the third ventricle, which is usually a slit-like, is ballooned. So the dilatation of the lateral ventricles as well as the third ventricle, it points to the site of obstruction somewhere below third ventricle. So what is hydrocephalus? The hydrocephalus, it's an abnormal or excessive accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid in the intracranial cavity due to disturbance in formation, flow, or absorption. So the normal CSF pressure is 3 to 7.5 mm of Hg, and the volume in infants is around 40 to 60 ml. In an adult, it's around 150 ml. And the rate of formation is around 0.3 to 0.4 ml per minute. So you will be asked about, if you get such a case, you will be asked about the classification of hydrocephalus. So it can be classified either as communicating or non-communicating, or as congenital and acquired. So in the communicating causes, it can be due to the excessive formation because of the choroid plexus papilloma, or due to decreased absorption as in post-trauma, post-hemorrhage, post-inflammation, or congenital infections. The obstructive type usually occurs due to congenital anomalies such as aqueductal stenosis, Arnold-Cali malformation, meningomyelocele, brain tumors, where the tumor may be directly compressing the ventricles, or in the AVM. The other classification, congenital and the acquired. Congenital causes are aqueductal stenosis, neural tube defects, Dandy-Walker syndrome, in utero intraventricular hemorrhage. And the acquired causes are aqueductal stenosis, hemorrhage of prematurity, brain cysts, tumors, and infections, and even in TBI. So the therapeutic management aims to relieve the hydrocephalus and treat its complications. So for when such a child comes for surgery, in the pre-anesthetic checkup, we ask for hemoglobin, we ask for serum electrolytes, because such patients are dehydrated and vomiting. So we should know the sodium and the potassium of the patient. Ask for the renal function test, coagulation study, and the chest X-ray. So chest X-ray is also helpful to rule out any other congenital anomaly in the heart. So the treatment modalities are of two types. Either we drain the CSF from the ventricles, or we don't drain the CSF but make an other opening. That is done by endoscopic third ventriculostomy. So to drain the CSF from the ventricles, the different procedures are external ventricular drainage. It is usually performed as an emergency procedure when the neurological status of the child is dipping rapidly and there is risk of brainstem herniation. So we do it as an emergency procedure. The others are placement of a ventriculoperitoneal shunt. The ventricular end is usually placed on the right side of the head in the ventricle, and the other end is in the peritoneal cavity. The ventriculoatrial shunt, where the other end is put in the right atrium of the heart, and the lumboperitoneal, which connects the intrathecal with the peritoneal cavity. So the pre-op assessment, see for the signs of raised intracranial pressure, the level of consciousness, see the underlying cause of hydrocephalus, whether it's an obstructive or the non-obstructive type, and any other pre-surgery temporizing measures. Has the child ventriculostomy has been done, or what are the medical measures that have been given to the child? Assess the fluid status. These children might be dehydrated, so assess the fluid status. See for the associated congenital anomalies. Assess the airway. It's very difficult to assess the child's airway, but see for any external craniofacial malformations, or whether the child is syndromic or not. Then age-related pathophysiology, whether the child is premature, because these patients will be prone to apnea in the post-operative period. And especially in the neural tube, children with neural tube defects, please ask the history for the latex allergy. Goals of anesthesia are the maintenance of cerebral perfusion pressure, control of hemodynamics, and smooth extubation. So the anesthesia management, the pre-medication is usually not required. Unlike the other pediatric patients, these are usually lethargic and drowsy. So they might not be even fully conscious or anxious. So these usually don't require any anxiolytic or any other sedative agent. The fasting guidelines are the same. The Nilpar orally for 6 hours for solid and 2 hours for clear fluids. In the OT, prepare your OT beforehand. Set the right temperature, increase the ambient temperature to 24 degrees Celsius, arrange all the pediatric equipment. The pediatric doses of drugs should be calculated beforehand. All the ventilator and the monitor should be set on the pediatric mode. Attach the ECG, non-invasive blood pressure and pulse oximetry to the patient, and especially the patients who have meningomyelocele, all the encephalocele, they should be very carefully positioned, because any pressure on the sac can cause its rupture or increase in the ICP. So what do? We place a donut and place a donut on the OT table, and we place the encapsulocele sac or the meningomyelocele sac inside the donut. So any direct pressure doesn't come upon the sac, and the ICP doesn't increase further. Induction of anesthesia, it depends upon the level of the anxiety of the child's ability to cooperate, the presence or the absence of a full stomach. In these children, if we can attain an intravenous access, the first choice of induction should be intravenous induction of anesthesia. The intravenous anesthesia induction is in a standard manner with fentanyl, propofol or thiopentone, and with muscle relaxant procronium. Intubation, because the head is large in children, and in the hydrocephalus it is even more large. So we have to ensure that the oral pharyngeal and the laryngeal axis are in the same line. So we place a sheet below the shoulders, so to align the three axes. The maintenance of anesthesia by volatile agent, oxygen and air, and the PCO2 is usually kept between 30 to 32 mm of Hg. If we can place an analgesia, for analgesia, paracetamol suppository can be inserted rectally before the start of the surgery. Intraoperative concerns, the positioning in this, the patient is usually exposed from head to torso. So, and with the head turned opposite side, secure the tube safely. Avoid hypercarbia, hypoxia, and hyperglycemia, and even hypoglycemia, especially in preterm children. Maintain hemodynamic stability. These children are usually dehydrated, so maintain normovolemia. And very important, during the insertion of the ventricular end of the VP shunt, there can be rapid drainage of the CSF, and at this time, the child is very prone to development of hemodynamic changes and arrhythmias. And even reverse transtitorial herniation has been also seen to occur. So be very cautious when the surgeon is inserting the ventricular catheter, and be watchful for the any hemodynamic changes. Specific issues, hypothermia, as I've already said, that the whole of the child torso is and the head is exposed. So you have to ensure that you are using warm fluids. If you have a warm mattress, use that. If you have overhead heaters, use those things, and preferably wrap all the extremities in the cotton pads to avoid hypothermia. During surgical stimulation, insertion of the ventricular catheter, there is tunneling, and this is a very noxious stimulus. So a short-acting opioid can be given to blunt the noxious stimulus and any associated tachycardia and hypertension, or by increasing the depth of anesthesia. So during the emergence, neuromuscular blockade is reversed and extubate only if the child is awake and the protective reflexes have returned and the child is normothermic. Patient that can be extubated will need a supplemental oxygen and apnea monitoring for 24 hours in addition to regular neurological observations. In the post-operative period, observe for the signs of increased ICP, see whether the child neurological status has deteriorated or not, assess the pupil size, see for abdominal distension. Sometimes the rate of absorption of the CSF is much less than the production. So the peritoneal cavity gets distended by the CSF. Watch for the abdominal distension, any respiratory distress or episodes of apnea. The complications, acute lowering of the ICP during the rapid drainage of the CSF can result in development of subdural hemorrhage because of the damage to the bridging veins. Even the direct injury to the blood vessel can also result in intracranial hemorrhage, although these are very rarely seen complications, but yes, these can occur. Pneumothorax can occur during the tunneling phase. Shunt infection and shunt obstruction are usually the late complications. CSF overdrainage, if occurs, it may result in slit-like ventricles and intracranial hypotension. So the features of the shunt failure will be, again, the child will become, manifest the features of raised ICP, irritability, bulging fontanelle, vomiting, loss of developmental milestones, and increase in head circumference. So coming to the alternate procedure, the endoscopic third ventriculostomy, it is usually used to treat the obstructive hydrocephalus. And instead of draining the CSF away, it keeps the CSF within the brain and the spinal cord. What happens in this, the neurosurgeon makes a hole. It makes a thin hole in the floor of the third ventricle. So now instead of the CSF flowing into the fourth ventricle, it directly goes from the third ventricle to the cisterns. So this channel is bypassed. This narrow aqueductal area is bypassed, and the CSF flows directly into the cisterns. The intraoperative complications, the irrigating fluid that we use for the endoscopic procedures, it can distend the ventricles and cause increase in the ICP. So watch for any hemodynamic changes intraoperatively. Watch for hypothermia because lots of cold saline is used for irrigation during endoscopy. So maintain temperature. Electrolyte imbalance because of the same reasons, because we are using normal saline or RL for irrigation endoscopically. And bleeding might occur because of the floor of the third ventricle is closely associated with the major vessels. So bleeding might occur if the surgeon accidentally damages the vessels. Thank you.